Hi guys, and welcome back to a new video. If you're new here, my name is Lindsay, and if you're not new here, welcome back. I am back today with a solved case from France that happened in the early 2000s. This was a very big case in France. I say that all the time, obviously. I tried to cover some of the most well-known French cases that you might not be familiar with, but I am looking forward to sharing this story with you because it is quite an unusual one. I don't think it's going to be as long as the other ones. But before I start talking about the case, I just wanted to let you know that I might be taking a week or two off before I post my next video because I am going on a holiday and I just want to be able to enjoy my holidays. So I might take a short break from YouTube just during the month of July. So if you don't see me posting for a little bit, it's normal. I'm just on a holiday. I'll be back very soon. I also did want to say that I'm finally fixing the audio on my videos. I apologize if the past few videos, if you listen with earphones, it only comes out in the left earphone for some reason. So I just wanted you to know I'm finally on top of things and I'm fixing it. So I do apologize for the past few videos. So that should be fixed from now on. I'm quite excited about it. And lastly, I am close to 1,000 subscribers. I've just hit 900 today. I'm very excited about it. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider joining my channel. It makes me very happy. And I really hope I can hit 1,000 subscribers quite soon because that's an exciting milestone. So with all of that out of the way, I will now start talking about the case. So this case happened in 2003 in France, in the Alps, in a town called Grand Bornand, which I believe is also a ski station in the Alps. On April 12th, 2003, Mario Leblanc, a 14-year-old teenage boy, made his way to his mother's house to spend the weekend. He would very often take a flight to the Lyon airport before taking a taxi all the way to Grand Bornand, which is where his mother lived. Now, his mother had divorced his father and had since remarried, and now Graziella was now living with Xavier FLACTIF and their 3 children, Sarah, Laetitia, and Grégory. They were all under the ages of 10. Sarah was 10, Laetitia was 9, and Grégory was just 6 years old. Whenever Mario would make his way to the airport and then to his mother's house, she would always phone him while he was in the taxi. Now, the taxi was organized by the town. It was a local cab from Grand Bornand who would volunteer to pick up Mario from the airport, and his mother would always phone him while he was on his way home. But this day, she never phoned him, and he initially assumed that it was because she must have forgotten, or maybe she was just really busy. However, when the taxi pulled up to the house, no one was there. Nobody was answering the front door, so Mario asked the taxi if he could wait a little bit in the cab because it was still a bit cold in April in the mountains. He felt that maybe one of his parents or his stepdad was just running an errand and running late and they would be home any minute. However, over time, no one made it back to the house, which is when he decided to check out the local restaurant where the family used to like having dinner or lunch. However, when he got to the restaurant, no one was there, and that's when he started feeling a little bit weird about the situation because this trip was planned. His mom and his stepfamily were expecting him, so this was definitely not a surprise visit, and he ended up having to dismiss the taxi driver, of course, and stayed with some family friends nearby. The family friends immediately found it very odd that nobody would be home, so they decided to go back to the house to check it out and see if maybe there were any clues as to where the family had gone. And when they got there, they found a French door that had been left unlocked. It was just a little bit open. They managed to step inside, and when they got inside, they were greeted by a very, very clean and tidy house, which everyone, including Mario, felt was very odd because this was a very messy family. I wouldn't say their house was ever dirty, but they were a family of 5. They always had documents lying around, maybe just paperwork or cushions all over the place. Just a normal household for a family of 5. Nothing was ever pristine and nothing was ever put away methodically. However, this time the house was suspiciously clean. Additionally, there were some bed sheets missing from the beds, and the family friends got concerned and immediately contacted police. Now, at first they thought that the family might have gotten into a car crash or an accident because Xavier was known to drive very, very fast and they lived in the mountains. And the roads in the mountains are just terrifying. They're always just twists and turns. You can't really drive very fast. However, Xavier was known to drive very fast, so Everyone was concerned that they might have gotten into an accident. They searched everywhere for traces of a car crash. Helicopters were looking for the family's red car, and even divers were instructed to search a nearby lake to see if maybe the car could have crashed and gone into the lake. However, by Monday, they had found absolutely nothing. They had no news of the family, and none of the kids ever made it to school. So that's when they knew that something was really wrong. Police had to start looking for clues as to where the family could have gone. They can't just disappear into thin air. So they got permission to search the house, and they found no trace of forced entry. It was honestly as if everything had very suddenly stopped inside that house, because there was a stew on the stove that was ready to be cooked. So all of the ingredients had been placed in the pot. It was just ready to go. The fridge was full. All of the electronics were left behind. So police felt like something sinister must have happened, because there is no way they would have just upped and left without taking any of the electronics with them or emptying the fridge. It seemed like if they did all decide to leave, it would have been a very, very sudden decision. The only obvious thing missing from the house or from the FLACTIF family, aside from the entire family, was the red car, which they couldn't find anywhere. 48 hours after the family went missing, a second search was allowed through the house, and this time police noticed that the laptops and the electronics that had been left behind were now gone. So someone must have gotten back into the house to take away electronics, the laptops, even some documents that were there the first time the police searched the house and were no longer there the second time they searched the house. And a lot of rumors started spreading. People speculated that maybe the family came back. Someone came back to get these documents, these electronics, because they felt like there might have been compromising information on them and they didn't want police looking into that. Since police have absolutely no clue what's going on at this point, they're very confused by the entire situation. They start looking into the FLACTIF family, more specifically Xavier. He was a real estate developer from the north of France, and he had been living in the region for about 5 years. He was well known for his schemes, but mostly for his scams, and namely one of them, he would purchase some land above the market price, build cabins on that land, and then sell them to investors or individuals as a buy-to-let property. So a property you would buy to rent out because it's in the mountains near a ski station. You could have holiday rentals. But he would always keep doubles of the keys, and he would sublet to other people without the owners knowing. So the owners rarely lived in the area. They would have no idea that the whole time Xavier is actually making cash by letting people live in the properties he doesn't own anymore. And none of the tenants had any idea that Xavier was profiting off of them and that Xavier wasn't the actual owner of the houses. He also got a really, really bad reputation in the north of France, mostly because he was scamming people. He would land them in a ton of debt. He would make promises. He would start constructions but never finish them. He would leave the construction site unfinished but take all of the money and run, basically. His victims even all banded up together in the north of France to start an association against him to try and get justice. But he was quite hard to get a hold of, and it's most likely why he moved to the Alps, to distance himself from his troubles in the north. He had actually been banned from owning a business, so his companies were all in his wife's name, even though he was the one running them. The couple had over 70 bank accounts, some of them in Belgium, most of them in tax havens, and Xavier was almost 3 million euros in debt. Now, because of his reputation and this debt, police believe that the family very likely just upped and left to move abroad, far away from all of these troubles, and start clean, start fresh in a new country. Maybe he had some money stashed elsewhere and he could just live a new life with his family abroad. Now, this theory really didn't surprise anyone in their hometown or in the Alps, because most people considered him a scammer. A lot of people didn't care for him. He had quite a reputation in his current town as well. And I think a lot of people were quite excited to think that he had to run away from his problems, but they also felt like he was smart enough or cunning enough to just leave very suddenly in a way that would confuse police so that they don't look for him or they don't look into it. I'm not sure. People were just a whole lot of speculations were happening. It was a small town as well, so you know how the rumor mills go. And unfortunately, it was quite a small town in the middle of nowhere. And the reality was that a lot of people did not like Xavier because he was black and they were racist. It had nothing to do with the fact that he was a scammer. I mean, obviously they disliked that as well, but they kind of blended the two together as if they went hand in hand, which was absolutely disgusting. So very quickly, the people from the hometown were very quick to give him names, even though they had no idea what happened to him or where he was. And the media really went with it. He wasn't from here. He wasn't from the area. He wasn't white. And he came out of nowhere to scam people, and he had a horrible reputation in town. But not only was he scamming the locals, he was also making quite a lot of money in the process. So a lot of people were upset at him for all of these reasons, and the media made things worse by feeding into the rumors and the name calling, and they would even label him the foreigner who didn't pay. I find it absolutely wild that before even knowing what happened to this family, he was portrayed as a horrible person who wasn't from here and who was responsible for his family fleeing the country, basically. But the reality was nobody knew what happened to the family. They just vanished, and no one had any answers. While police were getting absolutely nowhere, one of Xavier's tenants often stopped by the police station to let them know just how much he hated his landlord. David Otia was more than happy to share with police and speak to police about Xavier. He said that he would always pay his rent in cash at the end of the month, but over time he found out that Xavier wasn't the actual owner of the cabin he was staying in with his partner, and he didn't know who he was actually renting from. And the actual owners of the cabin didn't even know he was renting there. And very frequently, they had to move very last minute because there would be a new rental coming in that Xavier had to accommodate for, or maybe the actual owners of the house had a proper rental agreement, not knowing that David and his partner were living in that house, so they would have to move very last minute, and there's nothing worse than moving every couple of months. It's a very unstable living condition or living situation, and it made their lives very, very stressful because of the constant moving at the very last minute. Once the family was reported missing and seemingly vanished into thin air, a camera crew came over to film the beginning of a documentary, and David Otia and his partner Alexandra Lefebvre were questioned about Xavier because they lived nearby and they would constantly turn up at Xavier's house or the FLACTIF household. So, of course, journalists were asking questions and they actually filmed them. They were both quite brutal when talking about Xavier. They didn't have a kind word to say about him. And actually, Alexandra used to work for Xavier as a maid. She would help clean the cabins he owned. But in the documentary, she referred to him as an idiot who considered people his slaves. He would apparently dirty up the house while she was in the middle of cleaning it. He had zero regard for... He didn't ever concern himself with anyone but himself. He only cared about him and maybe his family, but he was quite rude. And although David wasn't as heated as Alexandra, he would always kind of hover around the TV crews and would volunteer information whenever they spoke to him. Now, when people first watched the documentary and the footage of Alexandra and David, a lot of them had been given a certain impression of Xavier. So they had already heard of Xavier from the media, so it was a very, very distorted image of who this man was. All they knew was that he was a scammer and he was foreign. That's the image they portrayed of him in the media, unfortunately. So obviously when Alexandra was on TV or in that documentary dragging him, I think a lot of people were kind of there for it, because I think a lot of people can kind of connect with, frustrations with landlords or certain living situations. So I think a lot of people felt that she was justified in talking about her landlord in that way on TV, because I think a lot of people felt frustrated themselves, and they had this image of Xavier, so they felt like he deserved this backlash. But police did find it very strange that she would be so upfront and brutal about her landlord when nobody knew where he was or his family was. He could be coming back any minute, or even if he was living abroad, he could very easily watch this and retaliate against his tenants, because obviously if you find out that your tenants are dragging you on TV, you're not going to want to rent to them anymore. No one would really dare be that bold on TV about their landlord. So police thought that was very odd. But also, David was asked by journalists what he thought happened to the family, and he said, I don't know, they probably just left, or maybe, I don't know, for all we know, there could have been carnage in there.
Mise en scène ou pas, ça. Ou alors c'est possible aussi quelqu'un qui a fait le carnage aussi là-dedans, on sait pas.
And police found that incredibly strange. So while the general public focused on the fleeing the country theory, police started focusing on David Otia and Alexandra Lefebvre. On April 17th, 2003, a third search of the house was authorized, and this time police brought a forensics team with them. They found traces of blood in the cracks of the wooden floors, a child's tooth, and a bullet casing behind the curtains. When the general public heard about this, they still believed that Xavier was smart enough to make it look sinister but still have run away, so they still maintain that theory. However, police were very, very concerned with what they found inside the house. A few weeks later, on May 5th, a fourth and final search of the house was announced, and after using luminol, police found blood all over the house, in the cracks of the wooden floors. They found it on every single piece of furniture and in every single room of the house, though most of the blood found was found in 5 areas, which would belong to the 5 family members who had been murdered. Through DNA matches, it was finally confirmed that Graziella, Xavier, Sarah, Laetitia, and Grégory FLACTIF had all been murdered in that house before having their bodies removed from the crime scene and someone deep cleaning the entire house. And it's around the same time that they found the car that belonged to the family. It was found at the parking lot of the Geneva International Airport, and traces of blood were also found in the trunk of the car, even though it had the carpet of the trunk cut out, so that had been removed from the back of the car. However, they still found traces of blood. An intensive search was immediately launched to try and find the bodies of all 5 family members. However, police came back completely empty-handed. They came up with nothing. They couldn't find any bodies anywhere in the region. There was, however, a 6th DNA profile mixed to the ones found inside the house. And for now, it wasn't a match to anyone they had on file. However, they knew that the DNA belonged to a man. So they decided to get DNA samples from every single person in that town. And police managed to single out 7 main suspects, but at the top of the list was David Otia, the one who had gone on TV to talk about how much he hated Xavier. The reason David was so interesting was that he was the last one to have seen Xavier alive. So police were very, very, very interested in him, and on May 13th, the gendarmerie officially put him under surveillance. They tapped his phones, and they wanted to see if they could get any more information than he was willing to share on TV. In July 2003, police finally got a hit on the 6th DNA profile found at the crime scene, and it was a match to David Otia. But instead of arresting him then and there, they decided to not reveal to him that the DNA was a match and make him think that they weren't onto him, because they wanted to see if they could get more information through his phone conversations. They were very afraid that if they confronted David right away, he would clam up and he would never reveal where the bodies were, because police were very interested in finding the entire family. They had no idea where all 5 family members were, and they also just wanted more information. They needed to know what happened and why, because up until then, obviously, they had absolutely no clue what had happened. So they didn't reveal to him that the DNA was a match, and they let him carry on his life for another 2 months. And it was worth it because they found out that Alexandra often threatened him to go to the police. She would go to the cops and tell on him, and he would be in big trouble if she did. So she would kind of hold that against him, like as blackmail. She was already distancing herself from him. And the two of them also implicated another couple they were very close friends with, Isabelle and Stéphane Aremza. Police were really hoping that David would reveal where the bodies were over the phone, that he would mention the spot where the bodies were potentially buried or dumped. But unfortunately, they never got that information through the phone conversations, and eventually they did have to arrest him. So on September 16th, 2003, 80 officers grouped together to arrest both couples at the same time. And it was very important to arrest them all simultaneously and interrogate them all at the same time so that they didn't have a chance to come up with a cover story that they could agree on. All 4 adults were immediately placed in custody on suspicion of murder and being an accomplice. Within half an hour of interrogation, David Otia confessed to all 5 murders and even offered police to show them where the bodies were disposed of. The spot David brought police to was a few kilometers away from the Grand Bornand, and all that was left of the 5 bodies was just a pile of black cremains. If David hadn't showed police where the remains of the bodies were, it's very likely the case never would have been fully solved because there was so little left. He talked police through the entire story and murders, and he didn't have any hint of remorse or emotion when he was talking about that night. On April 11th, he claimed that he made his way to Xavier's house to discuss an issue with the rental agreement. He had a problem, again, with the rental agreement because they were asked to move so frequently. He wanted to confront Xavier, but when he got there and started talking to him, the conversation quickly became a heated argument. And that's when David took out a gun and pointed it at Xavier's head. However, he didn't realize that the gun would actually shoot or go off. He thought he was just going to intimidate him by putting a gun to his head, and the gun just went off. It was an accident, and of course, once that happened, he knew he had to eliminate any witnesses, which is when he decided to murder Graziella and the 3 kids. Once everybody in that family was dead, he put them all in bed sheets and moved them to the trunk of his car before taking them to the forest where he burned the bodies. Once the bodies were fully burned, he returned to the house to clean up the crime scene. Now, obviously, police had a lot of issues with that version, but he did confess in front of the gendarme and then confessed a second time in front of the judge. The reason police were skeptical about this version is because, first of all, the couple, the Aremza couple, Isabelle and Stéphane, gave a very different version. They told police he had premeditated the murders ages ago. He got this idea from watching a documentary on the classified ads killer known as Alfredo Stranieri. I can make a video on him if you'd like, but Alfredo was a French serial killer who met his victims through classified ads, and he would turn up at their houses, kill them, and then appropriate their properties. So he would end up getting all of these properties by killing the people he found in classified ads. And I guess David watched that documentary and thought, this is fantastic, I must do that too. So he, his partner Alexandra, and the other couple all banded together to prepare this murder so that they could get their hands on one of Xavier's cabins, and it worked out great because they hated Xavier anyway, so it was kind of a win-win for them. There was no doubt that David was the one who had murdered all 5 family members. However, it seemed like quite a few of them were involved in the preparation and the premeditation part, and also all of them helped clean the house and cover some of the evidence and throw police off their scent. Given the amount of wood and gasoline necessary to cremate the bodies, police knew that David needed to have gotten some help. There is no way he could have pulled this off on his own, because to burn an entire human body, it requires an obscene amount of wood and gasoline, and it would take hours and hours. But the fact that they successfully cremated 5 entire bodies showed the amount of preparation that had gone into these murders. Police discovered that Alexandra was the one who had moved the car to the Geneva International Airport to make people believe that the family had fled the country. And when police searched David and Alexandra's house, they found 156 DVDs, 2 cell phones, a camera, electronics, children's skis. All of them had been stolen from the FLACTIF household after the murders. And David's motives seemed quite wild to police, but he actually did get what they were after, because they managed to get one of Xavier's cabins, and it wasn't just any cabin, it was the one next to his actual house, next to where he had murdered the entire family. On top of that, police discovered that a year prior to the murders, both couples had set fire to a cabin that belonged to Xavier and that was still under construction. They had also stolen a few cars. It seemed like all 4 of them were quite envious of their neighbors. It all seemed like they had more money than they had, and they were jealous of that, so they retaliated by committing crimes. On October 10th, 2003, David went back on his initial confession and gave a very, very different version of events. Now, buckle up, you're not ready for this version of events, because in this new version, he told police that on Friday 11th, he went to Xavier's house to confront him, but he was greeted by 2 strange men he had never seen before, and they immediately knocked him out. But when he came to, the entire family had already been murdered, and the 2 men were now forcing David to help dispose of the bodies. So now he was being blackmailed into disposing of the bodies, and that's the new version he was going with. And if you think the new version is bad enough, it actually gets more concerning, because his lawyer defended that theory. Now, I understand that is the lawyer's job, but he argued that David had parked his car in front of the house for everyone to see. So obviously, if he had premeditated these murders, there is no way he would have been stupid enough to show up in front of the house and park his car outside, because obviously so many people could have seen it. This made no difference to police, because they still believed he was the murderer based on his original confession and the confessions of Alexandra and the Aremza couple, and he was charged with the murders of all 5 members of the FLACTIF family. The trial began on June 12th, 2006, so pretty much 3 years after the murders had taken place. David stuck to his second version of events throughout the trial, and his lawyers tried to defend him, and they wanted him to be acquitted. They stood by him and pled not guilty, and tried to argue that there was no proof that the murders had happened any other way than their client's version. So for them, David's new version or theory is very plausible. The scene of the crime was the most reliable version of events, unfortunately, because all 5 bodies were pretty much fully cremated. There was no autopsy to go off of. But based on the evidence found inside the house and also checking the family's schedule, it was believed that David Otia arrived at the house when the children had gotten home from school. They were all having a snack together. It's very popular in France. There's a name for it. We have a snack around 4 or 5 o'clock after school. It's called a goûter. And that's exactly what the kids were having when David allegedly showed up at the house, or is believed to have showed up at the house. They got back before their parents did, but however, when David knocked on the door, because the children knew him, he wasn't a stranger, they let him inside the house, and that's when he started attacking them with a blunt object. He did have a gun with him, but from the blood splatter around the house, it was shown that there was way more damage made from a blunt object than from a gun. It was very obvious from the evidence inside the house that Grégory had been brutally beaten to death. Some of his teeth had been found on the floor. He had been beaten so hard that his teeth had been knocked out of his mouth. And it's also believed that Sarah and Grégory were the first to be killed downstairs, while Laetitia ran upstairs to hide in her sister's bedroom. She was hiding behind the bed, and she must have heard the screams. She must have realized roughly what was going on. She probably didn't understand it, but she could hear her siblings being murdered downstairs, and she also would have heard David making his way up the stairs one step at a time until he found her in her sister's room and also killed her. Once the children were all dead, he waited for Graziella to come home before shooting her, and then when Xavier got back home, he had a struggle with him, which would have been how David injured his hand or his arm, and that's how his DNA got mixed with the blood found inside the house. Now, the psychiatric evaluation for David was quite interesting. They found narcissistic traits with a tendency to avoid emotions during the actions, and an overall tendency to try and seek control. He had a very clear ability to separate himself from his actions, which made people or professionals believe that he is very dangerous to the general public. And they believed he was someone who had difficulty dealing with his emotions, so instead of being able to take a step back and evaluate the situation, he would take action. After his initial confession, he refused to take responsibility for his actions, which is why he came up with a second version of events, which he stuck by, and that implied a certain dissociation from the events. It was very difficult to say just how involved Alexandra was, because when she turned up in court, she was pregnant, not by David, by someone else. And she appeared very shy, timid, and reserved. And Alexandra claims she only found out about the murders after they had taken place. She only helped with the aftermath. She helped destroy certain elements of evidence. She moved the car to the airport. She admitted to that. But the Aremza couple confirmed that they had all helped plan the murders, but they got cold feet at the last minute. So David ended up committing the murders on his own. So it was a lot of he said, she said. However, the Aremza couple seemed to be the most honest with the actual version of events. In court, people initially saw Alexandra as very shy, very submissive woman who was pregnant. She was very soft-spoken, but one day in court, they decided to play the documentary that had been filmed when the family was reported missing. That included the footage of her and David talking about the FLACTIF family, mostly Xavier. And of course, in that video, she's calling Xavier an idiot and all these things.
Vrai. C'est un con. Déjà, il prend les gens pour des esclaves.
Qu'est-ce que vous faisiez, vous?
Je faisais le ménage chez elle.
And that's all they did that day in court. That's all they did was show that documentary to the jury, so that when they would go home after watching that, that's all they would have in their head was that version of Alexandra in that documentary, because it was very, very different from this persona she was portraying in court. In court, she had stopped dyeing her hair. She wasn't wearing any makeup. She was very soft-spoken. She was now pregnant. So I don't know if that was on purpose or not. I'm not going to accuse her of, planning a pregnancy to look better in court. But she clearly was very different from the footage in that video, because in that video she was very colorful with her language. She swore a lot. She was very upfront, and it actually made people believe that she might have been the brain behind these murders. Again, she was very heated in that footage, but it's very concerning that at the time nobody knew where the FLACTIF were, and she was basically dragging Xavier through the mud. And in hindsight, it is absolutely insane to think that she made those comments and she already knew what had happened to the family. So she had the audacity to call Xavier stupid and, say all these horrible things about him and, by extension, his family, knowing that her partner had murdered every single one of them and they had all cremated the bodies. The trial ended on June 30th, and David Otia was found guilty of 5 counts of murder with premeditation. He got a life sentence in jail with a minimum of 22 years. Stéphane Aremza got 15 years for having stolen gasoline for months in preparation for the fire needed to cremate the bodies, and he was also found guilty of being David's accomplice. The 2 women were actually accused of not having come forward with information regarding the murders and also for being associated with David and Stéphane. They took part in the destruction of some of the evidence. They also stole from the property after the murders, and Alexandra got a 10-year sentence. Isabelle got a 7-year sentence. David's brother actually did get a 1-year sentence because he disposed of one of the murder weapons. And in court, of course, Mario Leblanc was there because he was Graziela's son as well. His entire stepfamily and his mother had been murdered, and he had arrived the day after thinking that he was going to spend the weekend with them, and no one answered the door. It's because they were already dead. He was 17 at the time of the trial, and he was very upset because he got very few answers from David. Obviously, David stuck to his second version of what happened that day, so he never gave any closure or explanation or anything to Mario Leblanc or any friends or relatives of that family. It is so tragic that he suffers from survivor syndrome, since he was actually supposed to turn up at the house Friday night, but the plans got changed at the last minute and he arrived Saturday morning, and to this day he feels bad for not having been there the night before during his family's last moments, which is absolutely awful because that means that he also would have been murdered. And it's just absolutely devastating to think that he lost everybody all at once and found out the worst way possible. It was a very close call for him as well. He very well could have been home, and all of the friends and families of the FLACTIF family just lost so many people at once, but on top of that had to deal with the slander against that family while they were still missing before we even knew they had been murdered, which is just devastating. It's been 16 years since the trial, and I really hope Mario's in a better place now. I hope he doesn't blame himself at all or feels any sort of guilt, but it's not that easy, so I hope he's doing better now. I also feel bad for any friends, families of the FLACTIF household who never got to say goodbye, and because of the way the bodies were disposed of and cremated, it really didn't give them much closure or any traditional way of putting someone to rest. So it is a very interesting motive, I would say. I think that's why this case is so fascinating in the sense that it's just such a wild crime to commit just to get your hands on a cabin, but also because you don't like someone. I mean, David and Alexandra had kids of their own, so I genuinely do not understand how you could possibly go into someone's house and murder children who have absolutely nothing to do with the situation you're angry at, and then go home to your own kids. It's just absolutely insane to me. Obviously, he is still in prison and he's going to stay there for a very long time. I genuinely hope he doesn't make it out because he doesn't deserve to be walking around free. So that's it for today's video, guys. Let me know what you thought of this case. It is very, very well known in France because, again, it's just so different. It really baffled quite a few people. I also want to point out that a lot of the people from that hometown who were very quick to shit all over the family, especially Xavier, for his skin color or for his schemes, were very quick to turn around and feel bad for the family once they found out they had been murdered, which, you know, too little too late. I hope people have since changed their mindset on judging people or situations before knowing what has actually happened. And again, you know, obviously Xavier did have his business issues. I'm not going to say he was a good businessman. He definitely did scam some people. It doesn't take away the fact that none of them deserved what happened in that house. And I guess I'm just relieved that David initially confessed and showed where the bodies were, even though he went back on his confession. At least the case was solved, because without David's confession, I honestly don't think they ever would have found the bodies based on how little was left of them. And it was such a remote area in the mountains. It could have very easily gone unsolved. So anyway, that's it for today's video, guys. Let me know what you think about this case down below. I will be back in a little while, probably about 2 weeks. I'm working on a very big case, again, another French one, so prepare yourselves for that, and subscribe if you haven't already. Enjoy your summer, have a lovely end of July, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.